you wanted to have you speak.
As often as we can.
I look on my eyes can read it. Mine the test. If I can read it without my reading glasses, then
What's interesting is I was like a study, so at least it didn't give you the joy.
Good evening, everybody. Today is Monday, July 22nd, 2024. The time is 6 p.m. We're here for the budget work session of the Coppell City Council.
The first time I saw him, I'm like, oh, yeah, but then I'm okay.
Thank you. We do have a quorum present, so I'm calling the meeting to order. We do have one person that signed up to speak for our second citizens appearance, Mr. Schoaf. That is the second one, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So we don't have anybody for the first one, so we'll skip over that till later. Item number 3 is the introduction of the general fund and debt service fund. Our rock star, Ms. Kim Tien.
thank you, Mayor and Council.
I'm referring to the video that you posted.
I keep hearing about this video, but I haven't
Yeah, me too.
seen it yet, so I'm a little nervous about that. So, we love our CIO department. They do a great job. But, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here tonight to kick off the General Fund and Debt Service Fund budget workshops with you. But before I dive into the assessed valuations, the property tax rate, and general fund, debt service fund budgets, I do want to share some key points with you and some considerations regarding the proposed fiscal year 25 budget. So the proposed budget is a balanced budget that maintains the city's infrastructure and it enhances existing service levels. Maintaining the city's infrastructure and enhancing service levels are areas that staff understands are important to council. For example, the proposed budget does include a transfer to the infrastructure maintenance fund to fully fund the estimated cost to maintain our city facilities and the city's traffic system from fiscal years 2025 through 2028. The budget is also built around the assumptions that the Rule 3.334 is in effect. It is based on a 3.499% increase in property tax revenue. It is also built around the strategic use of the general funds fund balance. And it also keeps employees in the top third when compared to our survey cities. And then the last item is the proposed budgeted expenditures are 7.74% more than prior year. And that is after backing out the one-time transfers to the IMF fund to fund, again, those estimated costs of facilities and traffic projects. So now that you have an overview of some key points and considerations regarding the proposed fiscal year 25 budget, let's take a look at assessed values. This is on page 4 of your packet. And so this slide has the top portion of page 4. It doesn't have the bottom portion of page 4. The bottom portion of page 4 really shows you the breakout of where the growth is coming from. So it shows you any new construction broke out by residential, commercial, and then business personal property, and then it shows you reappraisals for each of those categories. This page has a lot of information. However, I want you to focus on the columns with the 2 red circles. The 2024 preliminary certified taxable value as of May 2022, shown in the first red circle, is about almost $12.3 billion. And this is up about almost $1.8 billion, or it shows 1.766. This is a 16.81% increase from the prior year certified value. So in 2023, when we did this comparison, we were up 15.81% at this same time. Last year, we were up 14.29%. So 2023 was the first time since the mid-90s that we saw double-digit growth in property. And back in the 90s, of course, we were growing, right? And so most of all of that increase was related to new construction. So based on the preliminary taxable values, commercial properties make up 48% of the total taxable value, and residential properties make up 52%. In May of the last 2 years, the allocation was 47% commercial and 53% residential. That's just a 1% difference, and I'm sure it's just how the appraisal districts are working the properties. So I would expect that when we end up, the split is going to be 45-55, just like it was in previous years, with 45% of the property values related to commercial, and then 55% related to residential. So the last comment that I have on this slide is to remember that the taxable values of residential properties with homestead exemptions can only increase 10% and no more each year. And then also there's some new legislation that is referred to as the circuit breaker, which limits to 20% the increase in the appraised value of non-residential real property that is valued at $5 million or less. So next we're going to go on to estimated growth. And so this slide is not in your packet, and it takes the preliminary valuation growth rate that we received in May, which is the 16.81% rate that you just saw on the previous slide, and it predicts a growth rate based on a 30-year average adjustment between the preliminary value and what the certified values ended up being. This adjustment has always been a decrease, and this is because between May and July, the appraisal district they're both working on protests, right? And they're adding any abatements that are out there. So this analysis is really just to help us predict where values will end up, so that we can predict a tax rate for you for this workshop. This analysis also, so it considers the highest and lowest adjustments that have occurred between the preliminary and certified values over the past 30 years. And the analysis shows that if the 30-year adjustment is used, the growth rate would be 10.28%. And then if we use the highest decline between the preliminary values and the certified values, the growth rate would only be 3.22%. If we use the lowest decline, then the preliminary values, the difference between preliminary and certified values, the growth rate would be 14.25%. So just a lot of numbers out there, right? And it's all a bunch of guesswork, and we're using 7%. So why are we using 7%? Well, we decided to use 7% because if you think back, all of the averages are built around 30-year average. The 10% cap on residential just occurred with SB2, so that was back in 21. And then the recent legislation on the 20% cap just occurred in the last legislation. So we just really are looking at what do we feel the rate is going to increase, and so we're using 7%. Another reason that we use 7% is if you recall the seesaw, as values come up, the tax rate comes down. If values go down, the tax rate goes up. So depending on where values come in, if the values come in at greater than 7%, the tax rate I'm getting ready to show you, if values are greater than 7%, then the actual tax rate will be less. If my 7% is high and values come in less, then the tax rate will be higher. Okay?
So, Kim,
yes,
for the last number of years, you've typically promoted an average tax rate, I believe, of 5% every 2 years or 2.5% a year.
right.
That's kind of been our standard. So you're basically saying that we're at least 3 times off of that rate right now and potentially more?
Right. So what's interesting is from 2019 to 2021, the average growth rate was 4.8. So our 5% was really good, right?
Right.
And then the last 23, 24, and then this year, it was 10% one year, 9%, and so what is it going to be this year?
And it makes it very difficult to predict.
It does, right? We were doing really good until these last 3 years. and then the market's all over the board, so it just
Okay,
keeps
thank you.
changing. So then, if I could get you to turn to page 5 in your packet. Page 5 shows the estimated tax rate based on taxable values growing at a 7% growth rate and a 3.499% increase in the M&O property tax revenue. That page also shows a breakout of the tax rate between maintenance and operations and INS. And then page 6 in your packet shows the same information but for the new revenue rate, which would generate the same revenue for the maintenance and operations property tax revenue, the tax rate as in the current year. The INS part will go wherever it needs to go based on what principal and interest is needed, but the M&O would stay exactly the same.
Ramesh?
Thank you, Mayor. Kim, for my clarification, so on page 6, $52,212,042, was that the revenue that we budgeted to spend last year?
No. It is not. And the reason why is because it would be for the M&O rate, so that 44 million, that should be the same,
Okay.
roughly. Do you have your budget book? And then what's different is the INS portion. So that 7.8 million for the property taxes, last year it was only 7.3 million.
Okay, got it.
Right, and that's because, as we discussed at the June retreat, we were gonna maintain the property tax rate for INS to be able to fund the bond payments.
So general fund, last year we spent 44,322,000.
Yeah, and that does agree in the budget book.
Just to be clear, since you're talking about property tax revenue,
Right.
the actual budget's larger than that.
Correct.
Right?
Yes, got it. Thank you.
So again, we have not received the certified tax values, so I cannot provide you with the official tax rate calculation. Those values we should receive this Thursday, so we will lock ourselves in a room and calculate your tax rate and have that for you next Monday. So then, I know we're always curious as to what is the estimated impact on the city's portion of a residential property tax bill based on the average home value for someone who has the own homestead exemption as well as someone who has an over 65 exemption. And so this first slide shows the impact on a residential tax bill for a property with a homestead exemption only. And so it shows the fiscal year 2024 versus the proposed fiscal year 25. And so this is based on the fiscal year 24 assessed value or taxable values, and it's based on the fiscal year 24 tax rate of 0.491818. And then for fiscal year 25, it is using the tax rate that is on page 5 of your packet of 0.478021, which is the 3.499% tax rate. So the average residential tax bill for a property with a homestead exemption, if property values were to increase 7%, would be about $8 a month more, or $96 for the year. And then I'm going to take you to the next slide. And this shows the increase for someone who receives the over 65 exemption along with the homestead exemption. And you'll notice that the amount of taxes for somebody that meets both exemptions, they're paying less in property taxes. Their tax bill is less. Their tax bill would change about $9 per month or about $110 for the year. Any questions on these?
Could you go back to the preceding slide just really quick?
Sure.
So why is someone with the extra exemption paying more per month?
Well, they're not paying more per month. Their increase is more, and that's because They both get the 5%, so 5% grows as value grows, right? 5% is higher on a higher value, but the 100,000 is just the 100,000.
Gotcha, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So a flat value versus a percentage.
Okay, thank you.
Kim, so if we maintain 10.5 billion, I know it's going to be increasing about 1.7 billion in valuation of property. If we keep 10.5 billion from last year, and we are increasing $5 million in additional expenditure this year, what would be the tax rate in total? Last year was 4.9, right?
I'm not sure that
So last year's property valuation was 10.5 billion, correct?
10.5 million, correct.
Billion.
Billion, thank you, yes, with a B.
If we maintain that this year at that same rate,
Mhm.
and we are increasing our expenses by $5 million extra this year, how much?
So, let me make sure I understand your question. You're saying that if our property value
Remains,
remains at 10.5, then I can't tell you what that tax rate is without calculating it, but the tax rate would go up,
right,
right? Because if your value, it's the seesaw, if your values stay down and don't go up, and you can raise your property tax 3.499, and that rate's gonna go up.
so what are the additional $5 million expenditure this year?
So let me get to that. I'm gonna cover revenues and I'm gonna cover expenses,
Okay.
and I think as I walk through the whole presentation, you'll get that answered, and if you don't, then we can come back to
Okay.
that, okay?
I was just gonna say, in the past, about $1 million is about a penny on the tax roll, though you can't directly relate that to it won't be 49 plus 5 cents, based on your question.
Right.
But basically, a penny equals about $1 million worth of revenue.
Okay, so now we are going to, is it okay to move on to general fund revenues? Okay, so this, if you'd move to page 7 and 8 of your packet, these pages provide you the list of sources of revenue for the general fund, and they show the amount being budgeted for each revenue source. And then I'm going to focus on page 9 of your packet, because some of us like graphs better than the charts, so they're easier to read. So the top of page 9 provides a 10-year history of total general fund revenues. And what I kind of found interesting was that for fiscal year 2020, the year before Senate Bill 2 went into effect, it was, the budget was created even before we knew about COVID and SB2. Actual revenues actually totaled $73.3 million. The total proposed budgeted revenues for fiscal year 25 are almost $74.6 million. And so the proposed budgeted revenues for fiscal year 25 are only 1.7% more than the actual revenues 5 years ago. Just wanted to point that out. So then at the bottom of page 9, that shows the pie chart that's going to be on this slide. This chart provides the total proposed revenues for each revenue category, along with each revenue source's percentage of the total revenue of the general fund. Property taxes, which is the blue piece of the pie, are budgeted based on the 3.499% rate previously presented. And this revenue source represents almost 61% of total revenues, or about $45.5 million. Next is sales tax, and sales tax is represented by the red piece of the pie, and it's 21% of total revenues, or about $15.7 million. We do, again, continue to budget as if the Rule 3.334 is in effect. And for fiscal year 25 proposed, we are budgeting a 5% increase over the adopted fiscal year 24 budget. Plus, there's an additional amount for a taxpayer that we initially thought was going to be impacted by the rule, but working with that taxpayer, we now believe that that taxpayer will not be impacted by the rule. So property tax and sales tax together make up 82% of total revenues of the general fund. And the remaining 18% is from charges for services, court fines, licenses and permits, franchise fees, and the miscellaneous other revenues.
Mayor, can I ask a question? Quick
Sure.
question. Kim, what's the explanation for the divergence on the interest income?
Okay, so for interest income, the 2023, we were earning well over 5% in that year, and so really about 6 million of that is actual interest income that's earned. The remaining about 2.8 million is from an accounting entry that we have to do at year end. So we have to look at what does the market say our investments are worth at 9/30, and we have to recognize an unrealized gain or loss. So we had an unrealized gain. What happens is in fiscal year 24, we have to reverse it out, so we're starting with a negative book balance. And so what we've done is we have adjusted interest we were budgeting about 500,000. We've taken it up to 1.5 million, as you can see for fiscal year 25. And so when we looked at what to budget for that, we're earning a little over 5% now, but we know that the Fed keeps talking about reducing rates, for one, and then we know that we are proposing to move 31 million out of the general fund to the infrastructure maintenance fund.
Okay.
So that
So the balance is going to substantially decrease?
Correct.
Yeah,
Right,
okay.
because our fund balance, we're moving that out to other funds
Okay.
to be strategic, right?
Do you think that 1.5 is still pretty conservative?
I
though?
think it is.
Yeah, because yeah, okay.
I would never build a budget around interest.
No,
I would
no,
always
it's
want to
just-
be conservative when it comes to interest because we just don't know.
But it was just such a stark difference.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Question.
Sure.
Thank you.
So when we are moving that money out of that fund, when you said we are still in effect of the tax rate with the 3.339 in effect, but we are moving fund to different buckets. We are not keeping it there.
Correct. So when I get to the general fund walk forward, we can talk about that because back, if you recall, when we had the June council retreat, we talked about the different buckets and what we were going to be using the general fund balance for. So that'll be pointed out to you there, and you can see where we're moving that away from the general fund. Okay.
Kim, I'm going to ask maybe the same question but slightly differently because I maybe didn't hear Jim's question correctly, or I didn't interpret it the way. But on page 7, we're talking about sales tax. In 24, the total amount of sales tax was 23.4 million, and you're showing a proposed budget for this next year of 15.6. That difference of 8 million is roughly due to State Rule 3.334?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So let me see. Where am I? So we're going to go back. Okay, so I'm gonna refer you back to page 8 in your packet again, because there's just one more thing I wanted to point out regarding revenues. So at the bottom of page 8, it shows that total revenues for fiscal year 25 proposed budget. At the bottom it shows the $74,560,966 compared to the fiscal year 24 adopted revenues, which is in that second column of the $69,573,010. The difference in revenues between the 2 years is almost $5 million, right? Or a 7.2% increase. And so there's 3 revenue sources that are contributing to that increase. The first one is property taxes, which accounts for about 1.6 million, and that's simply increasing property tax revenue to 3.499%. The second is sales tax, because we're increasing sales tax 5%, plus we've built in a little more than 5% for the business that I mentioned. So sales tax is increasing about $2.2 million. And then again, the final one that we've discussed is the interest income, which we've increased $1 million. So those 3 categories are really the reasons for your increase in revenue. Are there any questions on revenues? Okay, so next I'm going to cover expenditures, and then we'll get to fund balance. Since I shared the percent increase in revenues from fiscal year 2020 to 2025 proposed budget, I was curious about that same information for expenditures. And in comparing the fiscal year 2020 adopted budgeted expenditures to the proposed fiscal year 25 budgeted expenditures, it's an increase of 3.6%, which I found really interesting considering that's a 5-year time period, and you think about what's happened in 5 years, right? The inflation, it was over 6% for a while alone. So you just think about that, and that our expenditures have only increased from 2020, pre-SB2, pre-COVID, pre-rule change, and all the inflation, that we're only at 3.6% increase, I thought was pretty good. And I think that it also shows that the city continues to maintain its infrastructure and provide the level of service that our community expects. And I would also suggest that this is a good example of staff being good stewards of the city's resources and working together to plan, prioritize, and strategize the budget needs for each year.
What's the explanation, or what falls within the title of combined services?
I'll get to that.
Okay, thank you.
So what are the budget needs for fiscal year 25? Page 10 and 11 in your packet shows expenditures by division for fiscal year 23 actuals. It shows it for fiscal year 24 adopted, and it shows it for fiscal year 24 amended budgeted expenditures. And then the last column is fiscal year 25 proposed budgeted expenditures. Page 12 of your packet provides a graphical analysis of the general fund expenditures. And as you can see on this page, we have two ways to look at expenditures. We can look at them by function or by classification. The graph on the top of the page compares expenditures by function, and it compares fiscal year 24 adopted versus fiscal year 25 proposed. And then the graph at the bottom of the page provides a comparison of expenditures by classification for the same time periods. So both of the graphs in your packet show total expenditures, which include the one-time transfers. So if you recall, last year we had the one-time transfers to the Capital Replacement Fund and the Enterprise Solutions Replacement Fund. This year we have the one-time transfer to the Infrastructure Maintenance Fund. So the total expenditures for fiscal year 25 are $105,609,584 for fiscal year 25 proposed, and then for 24 that was $75,911,640 for the fiscal year adopted. But if we remove the one-time transfers to those other funds for both years, then total expenditures, whereas you can see at the bottom of page 11, was about 69.1 million for adopted 24, and it's almost 74.5 million for fiscal year 25.
And this is the $5 million increase, correct? Yeah.
Correct. And we'll talk about that. But I think looking at the graphs on page 12 in your packet, you can see that the inclusion of those one-time transfers skews our ability to really compare the operating expenditures between years. So the handout that I gave you this evening excludes those one-time transfers from the graphs shown in your packet. And it excludes them for both years. And so I'm going to go over the graph that I handed out to you, and that graph is going to match what's on the screen. Okay. So this first slide shows expenditures by function for fiscal year 24 adopted versus fiscal year 25 proposed. And the blue section represents public safety, and it is the largest section for both years. Public safety represents 40% in the fiscal year 24, and it now represents 43% in the fiscal year 25 proposed budget. This is a 15% increase for public safety, and the increase is related to salaries, a radio replacement, and then some legal services used by the police department. Going clockwise, the next section, the orange section, which is Public Works, and Public Works represents 14% of the pie for fiscal year '25 proposed, and it represented 17% for the fiscal year '24 adopted. This is a 7% decrease in Public Works. The decrease really is the net impact of an increase in salaries, and then the decrease in the annual transfer for traffic and facilities to the IMF. We're not making those annual transfers since we're proposing to make that large transfer to cover the 25 through 28. So let me see, these two functions, we consider them our first responders, public safety and public works. And so because they both provide for the safety and the infrastructure of our community, and so together our first responders make up 57% of our total expenditures of the general fund for both fiscal year '24 and fiscal year '25.
Ramesh had a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Kim, back when you were talking about the public works for fiscal year 2025, you mentioned that the 7% decrease was a factor of net of increase in salary and a decrease of transfer. So from an operational standpoint, I thought we were not counting transfers.
So what I pulled out was the big transfer that we're making, the 31 million.
Mm-hmm.
But the Public Works Department, Traffic and Facilities, every year there's an annual transfer that is included in the budget. It's about 190,000 for traffic, and then we also transfer about 1.2 million for facilities. And so we're not making that transfer since we're including that in the 31 million. So that's going to show up, the 31 million is going to show up in another area when I get to another piece of the pie.
Don?
Along with that, but we do transfer every year into the IMF, right? Next year there will be a transfer, correct?
No. Well,
There won't be?
okay. So we do Public Works.
Uh-huh.
Every year we typically transfer 190,000 for traffic, about 1.2 to 1.5 for facilities, and then about 1.6, almost 1.7 for streets.
Okay.
The streets transfer is still in the budget. That annual transfer will still occur.
Okay.
But the other two, the transfer for traffic and the transfer facilities, we will not be making from 25 to 28 because that's included in the 31 million.
So there's not an intent to replenish that fund over time? Is that the idea?
Correct.
So the transfer is in addition to the 0.25 sales tax that's coming to the IMF, right?
Correct.
Right.
You know, Kim, just a comment, because this page was supposed to be for us to understand net of the 31 million transfer. But then in this orange slice, we are again saying that in 23 the transfer was there, but in 24 adopted, the transfer was added, and in 25 proposed it's not there. So somehow it's not apples to apples comparison for me.
So in 24, the annual transfer was there.
Mhm.
Okay, I didn't pull it out up there because we actually made that transfer. The transfers that we pulled out were one-time transfers. The transfers that we're discussing right now are annual transfers.
Okay.
We always transfer to traffic, we always transfer to facilities, and we always transfer to for streets.
I get that, but my comment is, it's not fair to compare these two metrics here because one includes transfer and one does not. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, yes, and. Because of how we're treating the 31 million, here's another way. You could have said for next year, of this year, depending on how you want to view it, you said 190,000, and how much was the second one?
1.2.
1.2. So say $1.3 million of that 31 million could have still been left in.
Good ideas.
We're choosing not to because we're including it in the 31 million that we're moving over. So it's That's why I say yes. 24 has the automatic transfer in it, this one doesn't. But it's being picked up in another location and moved over.
So that's part of the sales tax we are moving,
Yes.
right? Yeah. So
Yeah.
how do we say we have in effect 3.3, the operation wise, we are moving money to run the operations? When you said we have 3.334 in effect, we are running the city with that in effect.
That is correct.
But we are moving money.
That
from-
is correct, but philosophically, we started doing that last year.
Right.
For the purposes of being able to use the excess sales tax for these one-time expenditures. The other way that you could look at that, if you want to, is, okay, don't do that. Put in the 1.3 million back over here, then we calculate the tax rate based on what it needs to operate with the 1.3 over here. But you're still sitting with now, instead of moving 31, you've moved roughly 29.7. So it's utilization of the funds for the purpose of what we've identified.
And actually, if I understood Peter's question correctly, I think he's bringing up a different point. The way I understood your question.
Well, no, I understood the question. He says if we're saying we're operating under 3.499 and we're operating under the sales tax rule, his statement is that we're not.
Right.
Because we are not spending the $1.3 million here. If we were to put the $1.3 million back over here into Public Works, it would then therefore be 12.2 million.
That's true
And
for
we're-
other
and-
budget too.
Yeah, and I would say to you, we could do that. It'll just change some other calculations that we bring back to you on the 22nd. Then I would say to you, then what are you doing for the purpose of the money that we're setting aside for IMF is for those purposes?
Yeah.
So if philosophically, if the council says, no, I want to operate under this particular environment, perfectly fine, council, this is what it's going to cost. And this is what the tax rate is necessary to support that. We're giving you the option of utilizing the funds for the purposes of which we set out, that we said we would do.
In my simplistic mind, what would have been clear is if we had an apples to apples comparison of from a plan to spend standpoint, this is what we did last year, this is what we plan to do this year, and then once we agree on that, we can decide how to fund that expense by moving from a different fund.
And I'm saying to you, I've just told you, that number goes to 12.2. In order to support that, instead of a 47-cent tax rate, it could be a 48 tax rate. Right? But it can't, yeah. But it can't really because you're limited by SB 2. Which then means I'm going to be doing a reduction somewhere.
So I think the difficulty here, Ramesh, is the apples to apples comparison that you want is actually on the previous page that Kim showed. That doesn't accurately reflect.
Page 11?
You can look at page 12.
12, it's page 12.
It still shows that.
Page 12 reflects what you're asking for. That's with everything as is, but the 31 million that we agreed to transfer to fund some one-time projects skews the data. So she's tried to pull that out to make it more of a actual comparison about what we're doing. Now, granted, in the accounting world, they grouped some other one-time transfers into that 31 million, which is what you were questioning. It's kind of.
So I was trying to get to where it's more operational, and as I said, the 190,000 that we would do for traffic and the 1.2 that we would do for facilities, we were considering those operational. And yes, we are working some strategies The same thing that we did with the capital replacement fund by fully funding that, right? That took it out of the general fund and put it over there, and that's paying for it for the next 5 years. We are replenishing it. There wasn't a decision made to replenish the IMF. The decision, and what we proposed as the strategy was to take the 31 million and let's fund these things that need to be maintained for the facilities, the things that we've identified, right? And it's a strategy to get for the next 5 years while we figure things out.
So, okay, so it's, what'd you say, traffic is one, the couple $100,000? And then
Facilities.
Oh, wait, facilities, okay. What was the 1.2?
Facilities is 1.2, and then streets, and really it's streets, sidewalks, alleyways, and ADA items, is about 1.6, almost
Okay.
1.7, and that's still in there.
What was the, wasn't there a 200,000, 190 or something?
190 was traffic.
Oh, okay, so traffic and, facilities, those are ongoing. We fund those every year. There's,
Typically do.
okay, so those will be ongoing, so it's the streets, that's the wild card here.
So, correct, but you still have the quarter-cent sales
Yep.
tax that's in IMF for
Yes,
streets.
exactly.
So you still have that.
So we've decided we got, well, it's not 31 million, it's something, I guess, less than that. We've allocated out a general fund balance that we're gonna use now for a bunch of projects over the next 5 years, right? That's what we've come up with. But after that, aren't we gonna, what's the plan to fund, I guess, ongoing street and alleys and everything, I guess, beyond that?
So streets is still included in the budget. We didn't, the 31 million does not include anything for streets, simply facilities and traffic system. We are still budgeting an annual transfer for streets, and it's
Okay.
$1,656,000 in this proposed fiscal year 25. We're still budgeting that. We're still budgeting that, plus IMF, and that transfers to IMF, plus IMF receives the quarter-cent sales tax for streets. So streets has a funding source, right? It's the other things.
So how much is the extra transfer from the general fund, I guess?
31 million.
It really is 31, it really is 30.
111,900.
Yep, 31,119.
900, yeah.
Page 7.
Okay, but if I look up, if you look up in the combined services, there's only a $25 million change year over year.
Right.
So I guess that must be buried,
It's
things are buried
because,
somewhere else. I mean,
Right.
part of that 31 million
yeah,
must be
and we'll
somewhere
talk about
else.
that.
Okay,
I'll give you some explanations.
okay.
I'll continue to go through, and then I think you might get that explained.
Okay.
Yes. Kim, back on slide 11, sorry, page 11, where the bottom you do the net of 31,111,900. I'm assuming a portion of that will get spent in next year, correct?
Yes.
So let's assume divided by 5 and say it's 6 million. So technically, next year we're spending 6 million plus the 74,497, correct?
That would be almost 80 million, the way you just said that.
Yes.
We're spending 74.
Right, but of the 31 million, there's a portion of that we're going to be spending next year, correct?
I'm trying to understand the way that you're saying that question.
I guess because we're spending it over 5 years, he's saying, what are we spending it for next year, right?
Right. So next year,
Oh, for capital projects and I'm sorry, I have to think through what the next question is.
So IMF, they have a list of projects, and so the projects that they're planning to do next year are, so they have fire station number 3, they have some interior construction, that's about 5.5 million. They have 300,000 for some animal shelter work that needs to be done. There's something, generator at the senior center, dehumidifier at the core. The Justice Center has an entrance, concrete replacement at their entrance. And then the normal, they had asked for the normal facilities transfer for fiscal year '25 was 1.3, and we went ahead and built that into the 31 million.
So just for discussion, let's assume all of that adds up to 6 million or 5 million. My question is it the regular practice that we don't count that as money spent next year because it's part of IMF?
It is counted as overall expenditure. It's the big picture budget.
So my follow-up question, Mike, is if that is 6 million, should we take a 6 million and add it to the 74,497?
No, because it's not in the general fund, it's in a different bucket.
Okay, so we are now.
It's the bucket accounting that we've met with?
Got it. So this is only for general fund?
Correct.
Understood.
That's all you're talking about tonight is general fund.
Sorry.
You had the special
It took me a
revenue
while to get
fund.
there.
That's
I'm
okay.
there.
You had the special revenue funds last Monday night. In that budget, there was the IMF and the discussion about the transfer of the 31 million.
I'm still getting over mesh, it's all right.
Well, that's okay. We had to figure out the questions first to make sure that we're answering the questions.
Okay, are we ready?
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're on the green section now, which is culture and recreation. And culture and recreation represents 18% of the total operating expenditures in the fiscal year '25 proposed, and it represented 19% in the adopted fiscal year '24 budget. This is a 4% increase from the fiscal year '24 adopted budget, and the increase is related to salaries, replacement of an automated material handling machine at the library, furniture at the senior center, and an increase in electricity costs that we're seeing in the various facilities. The divisions that are included in culture and rec are the library, life safety park, the core, park operations, the senior center, wagon wheel, tennis and pickleball center, the biodiversity education center, as well as the camps and athletics programs, and then the community engagement division. Next is the light blue section of the pie that represents community development. Community development makes up 5% of the total general fund operations, operating expenditures in both years. Community development is down 1%, and this is the result of, it's a net result of an increase in salaries, the addition of 2 positions. They've asked that we've added a senior code enforcement officer and an economic development coordinator position to this proposed budget. So it includes that. And then the budget for fiscal year '25 includes $500,000 for the food truck park. Fiscal year '24 had $1 million. So we've reduced that project from $1 million to $500,000. That's really why you're seeing the decrease. The divisions included in community development are environmental health, building inspections, planning, economic development, and then just overall community development administrative. And then the last section is the general government section, represented by the purple. This function makes up 20% of total operating expenditures in fiscal year '25 proposed, and it represented 19% in fiscal year '24 adopted. This is a 12% increase, and the increase is attributed to including cybersecurity, some cost of cybersecurity, an increase in software subscription costs, salaries for the divisions included under general government. And the divisions included under general government are council, legal, city manager, city secretary, community information officer, or office, strategic financial engagement, procurement, employee experience, enterprise solutions, and then the combined services. So operating expenditures by function as a percent of total expenditures are really relatively consistent between years. But let's take a look at expenditures by classification.
Before we go there,
Okay.
in the community development, you said that there was going to be the addition of 1 code enforcement. is that gonna keep up with the increase in rentals and other things that we've talked about this year?
That's one of the objectives, yes.
Is that enough?
I would rather say let's get into it and be able to come back to you and say if it is or it's not.
Fair enough. Thank you. Somebody, yeah, Kevin, a question.
Kim, I am so sorry if I missed this. The combined services, I noticed on the change for 24, 25, basically 24.5 million. And that's on page 10. What's in that 24 million change? And I do apologize if you said that.
It's good. So in that is, I have it here, combined services. So it is the net change in the one-time transfer between fiscal year 24 and 25 proposed. And so in 24, we budgeted the almost 5.7 for the capital replacement and almost 1.1 for enterprise solutions, right? And then, so that's gone away, but now we're doing 31 million.
Okay.
So the difference is about 24 million, right? And then the other piece is we are doing the normal transfer that we would do annually to replenish the capital replacement and enterprise solutions replacement fund. So that's the other piece of it. So we're adding that.
So you had the one time, but then back to the regular replenishment.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
This year we have the regular, and then this year we decreased the internship. We have an intern program, and so we reduced the number of interns that we're going to do. So I think that
Interns aren't
answers
free?
Councilmember Walker's question about what's in combined services.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So thank you for bringing me back to that.
Okay, all right.
Meant to do that.
That's all right.
Thank you.
Kim, how many employees are we total budgeting for FY 25, full-time and part-time?
It is 448. It's an increase of 2. So, thank you. Right, so the current is 446.36, and then because we're adding the 2 positions for community development, that would put it to 448.36.
Out of the 446, how many full-time, how many part-time?
I cannot tell you that off the top of my head.
Okay.
I look at full-time equivalents. I don't look at full-time versus part-time.
Is it an increase of 2?
2 for community development. So next we're going to look at operating expenditures by classification. The largest piece of this pie is salary and benefits, and it is represented by the blue section. Salaries and benefits represents 60% of total operating expenditures in fiscal year 24. For fiscal year 25 proposed budget, salary and benefits represents 69%, and this is a 12% increase from prior year adopted. Salaries and benefits includes, again, the 2 additional positions for community development, and it also incorporates the results of the compensation study.
But you're looking at by classification now?
I am. So it's the bottom, it's the 2.
Right, but yeah, no, okay, but it shows a decrease, right, where the salary and benefits are 60%. Oh, you're looking at this one?
Yeah.
Thank you, okay.
Yeah, I'm looking at this.
Yeah, I was looking at the wrong pie. Okay, thank you.
Yep. That's where the skewing comes in. If we have the 31 million, it skews all of the other percentages.
Gotcha, okay.
Which is really why we needed to see it this way.
Yeah, it's really apparent at that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Kim, the bottom graph, the salaries and benefit have gone up, like, let's say 5.5 or 6 million. Is that primarily cost of living increase and the 2 heads?
The first is, if you recall, public safety, police and fire. We were significantly behind on our top third. Yeah, from a salary, right, from a salary standpoint. About half of that is right. Half is in public safety, police and fire. Increasing their pay grades and their steps. So changes to be back in the market on that. The next was from a market analysis. So in 2022, I guess it was, the city authorized to do a complete comp analysis, and a lot of focus was put at the grades that were the lower pay grades, let's just say that. So in the market analysis, the update, so now basically it's the equivalent of 2.5 years, basically. There were some adjustments that needed to still be made in those pay grades. And then our market adjustment is at, I'm sorry, the merit pay is at 3.5%. So that's the three major changes that attributed for that increase.
Thank you, thank you.
And then the next four categories, supplies, maintenance, services, and capital, are relatively consistent between years. The detail for the capital category is on page 13 of your packet. Capital is down 51%, but this category does change from year to year based on requests. And then I would say it's also, achieving the goals of the replacement funds. The purpose of the replacement funds is to have more of a even budget from year to year, right? So that we're only doing the transfer, the 1 year transfer every year. So you wouldn't expect to see equipment and things being requested out of this budget since you fully funded the replacement fund last year. So that is working. And then the last portion of the pie is for transfers. This classification has the was 13% in fiscal year 24 adopted, and it's only 3% in the proposed, and we, I think, spent a lot of time talking about the transfer. So again, the general fund normally transfers the traffic and the facilities transfer on an annual basis. We are not doing that since we are proposing to do the 31 million. So are there any questions regarding expenditures?
I'm sorry, what are we not doing because of the 31 million?
The 190,000 for traffic system and the 1.2 for facilities.
Okay,
because we're
thank
doing
you.
that big transfer.
Gotcha.
Kim, would that hypothetically, would that come back in next year's budget? The
No.
lower, and so the goal is to keep that off for the next 5 years because of, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just want to make sure I understood that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. On the transfers, there's a 7.5 million drop compared to last year. And we talked about the 1.8, 1.9 in the previous slide. But how do you explain the 7.5, Kim? And thanks for.
Transfer.
Was the question worded wrong?
Well,
No.
I don't understand your
I think
question.
I think
Okay,
it's-
I'll repeat.
He's asking about the
So,
difference.
in this handout that Kim gave us, the transfers compared to last year has dropped 7.5 million. Earlier on, when we talked in the general fund, sorry, what is that?
I did not pull the $6 million out of that. I'm thinking. I
You're
think
talking
that's what
about for the
happened.
capital replacement and
I
for
think
the
I left that
enterprise
alone.
solutions?
That makes more sense.
I think I did.
Noise?
I think that's what happened.
So it's not totally wrong, so
I don't think
What's
it
that?
is.
I was not totally wrong.
It
I
has-
didn't say you were, I just didn't understand your question.
I'll have to check that. Yeah. I'll check that and let you know.
Thank you.
Can we move on? Good, okay.
Except for Don.
Except for me. Can you explain, because I sort of need a reset on capital replacement funds, like we've done the last 2 years, and the IMF, and exactly how they are different. Right? 'Cause the capital replacement I know is ongoing every year. We got, whether it's a fire truck or whatever it is that needs to be replaced, we forecast out and we replace that. But, so the IMF, those are one-time projects, is that,
That's how we see those as one-time projects.
so it's not ongoing maintenance?
I mean,
So the IMF on the transfer, like on the sidewalks and those types of things, we continue to budget for, well, saying it this way, fortunately, over time, we've been able to reduce the amount because of the amount of funds that were invested in sidewalks for a long time, but, so it's a one-time expense, but it's an ongoing, if that makes any sense to you. When we replace a sidewalk, we move on to the next sidewalk to replace. That's a
Right.
one-time fix. Then we move to the next, right? For the streets, if there's things that have to be done on the streets, like the panels, that's an investment. And when we approve the budget, when y'all approve those contracts, usually those contracts are like up-tos, right? And I think sometimes it takes 2 years to spend the up-tos on those panels, as an example, or on some of the street work that's done. But you're budgeting for it in that particular year. It's in the IMF fund. Is that helping?
Well, for whatever reason, it's not really. Because I thought I also heard that we always fund the traffic and the facilities. But then I thought I also heard that we aren't going to transfer those monies in the future.
because we built that into the 31 million.
But I
If
guess,
you-
but I thought that the 31 million was only the streets piece.
It's not anything to do with streets. The 31 million has nothing to
I
do with
guess
streets.
I'll just have to follow up because I'm not catching something. I mean, I don't have any doubt in the fact that we've allocated a bunch of money for the infrastructure. I was just confused how we're not
Okay,
having to
let's-
continue to budget.
Let's stop. So, in an annual budget,
Right?
$1.2 million typically has been, right, part of the budget for streets. It is still part of the budget for streets. So tell me what I'm not answering in that answer.
There's $31 million that we were going to spend for that one,
No.
on that.
That's what we're saying. That's not, we're still budgeting the $1.2 million for streets. The 31 set aside, forget streets and the 31 million for a moment. Okay? Are you with me or not?
Well, I'm not, no, I guess I'm not. I'm not
Okay,
tracking.
so let's go back. Go back to what is exactly in the $31 million transfer. Let's just talk about
Okay, so.
only what's in the 31 million.
Only what's in the 31 million are things for, it's the facility, the annual facilities transfer, which is usually about 1.2 million. It is a roof replacement for Cosby Library. It is the hangar, the work that's being done over at the hangar. It is the lobby safety improvements at Town Center. It's the library generator being installed at the Cosby Library. It is the, and then it's the employee experience is doing a little remodel of their area. There is a dehumidifier for the core. There's a generator for the senior center. The entrance, replacing the concrete at the entrance at the Justice Center. Fire Station 3 has some interior construction. Animal shelter has some work that's going to be done. And then they're doing safety and security study for 265. There are building improvements for 265. There is Fire Station 1 has some interior construction. Wagon wheel restroom installation. And then town center elevator, hydraulic pump replacement, and then fire station 2 has some interior reconstruction. So, no streets, just that. And then there's also, and I didn't list it in this, but then there's 190,000 for the next 4 or 5 years for traffic.
Okay.
Okay. So none of that's in the 31 million, strictly traffic and facilities. And because we.
None of that is in the 31 million? None of that's in the 31 million? I
No,
thought.
no streets are in 31 million, I'm sorry. No streets are in the
Oh, okay.
31 million, just what I read off to you.
Okay, so that makes sense, one time, or somewhat
That's what we're-
designated projects. But I thought we transfer money every year into IMF for public works, out of the general,
Correct.
out of the general fund budget, I should say.
Correct.
But we're not doing that any longer.
So because we included it in the 31 million,
Mhm.
we will not make an annual transfer for 25 through 28 because it's built in. These are the projects they said they need. We're fully funding these projects, so we're not going to transfer money in for facilities and traffic. We are going to continue the annual transfer for streets. And I say
Okay.
streets blanket because it's for alleys, sidewalks, streets, and ADA.
So that's still being transferred every year.
Every year, and it's about almost 1.7 million.
Okay.
That is staying as an annual transfer.
So theoretically, at the end of 28, so we've done all these projects at the end of 28, theoretically, there will be a new transfer for new facilities
If they're.
that need to be
Right, well, that
addressed
goes back to the
sometime.
5-year forecast, and it goes back to the work that we do on an annual basis. So when you project out to the next 4 years to 29, if there's something on the facilities, they'll identify that as well. Then we are building that into the budget as we go, as we look forward to the budget. One of the things we do on that 5-year forecast too is we almost go down to 1% after, right, in terms of growth. And so we're projecting out almost with 0 growth in the property tax base, and then balancing the budget. I mean, we're already working to balance the budget in 28.
Yeah.
I think this might help you too, is these to me are bigger projects, right?
Mhm.
That we're paying for.
Right.
We're still doing, these facilities still has a maintenance budget. It still has a building maintenance budget. So there's still money being budgeted to care for our facilities, for painting or small type of things, right? Just normal repair and maintenance. These are big things that
So-
we're funding. So
So
I would make that clarification.
So we've taken $31 million from capital projects and we're transferring it one time, even though we're recognizing that the payment of those projects, as they're designed and implemented, constructed like that, will take over a 5-year period. So how do we, so let's say in 26, we've spent 15 of the 31 million on those capital projects. How do we book that? How do we reflect that? Because we've already funded the projects, right, in 25. We're gonna have that money segregated and used to fund all those projects over a 3-year period. So then, in the 26 budget, we're not gonna show that those projects or that 31 million or the balance of that 31 million, right? So where do we book that?
So it's recorded in the infrastructure maintenance fund.
Ah, okay.
Right, so the
Okay.
31 million comes in, it's a revenue in fiscal year 25 of the infrastructure maintenance fund. We're not gonna spend 31 million, it's gonna go into fund balance. Just like much of the sales tax,
Right.
right? Those funds, you've watched the fund balance of those funds that are receiving sales tax grow. We don't spend all we get, it's there
Right.
for projects for
But-
multiple years.
But if we wanted to see in 2 years, so how did we do with that $31 million capital outlay? That we would just look to the accounting for the IMF.
Yes, last Monday, if you turn to page 24 under 7/15/24, and if you have your book with you and you look at the IMF, The actual 22-23 fund balance was basically 27.5. The adopted for 23-24 was 28.2. The proposed budget is 56.3.
Yeah, right. So I mean, look,
So
you have to
as each
understand-
year goes through, there's the list of the projects that y'all see.
Right,
And so that number will be coming down.
sure, sure.
And it's married to projects.
But if, yeah, and so the only point is if we wanted to look 2 years from now and see how we're doing
What your
with 31
status
that we're
is.
approving today, that we're setting aside and then dispersing to a dedicated fund.
Right.
I mean, the accounting will be there. We'll be able to see
Correct.
based
Yes.
on, because we're not gonna, like, so we're not gonna spend all 31 million in the first 6 months, right? It's for long-term capital projects. Okay, I mean, that, yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me.
And we have to keep track, even the money that comes in for sales tax for the streets, I don't it's in IMF, but I keep track of that separate and apply streets projects, not facility or traffic,
Right,
right? So we have to, whatever's coming in for facilities, we'll be monitoring how much comes out of that.
So the distinguishing factor really was not the year-to-year alley repair stuff or the street repair stuff. It was large capital projects that are going to fund over a period of years from design and inception all the way through final
Correct.
construction.
Right.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah, these to me are not, we fund them every year from the general fund, but to me, it's not normal repair and maintenance from an operating
Right.
perspective. These are bigger projects.
And is it fair to also presume that the interest income would be contributed to, at least in part, by the 31 million, any interest we would earn on that fund as well, before it's spent?
Correct. Yeah, so once we transfer the 31 million over there, assuming you adopt the proposed budget, that gets transferred over. Now, all of the interest on that 31 million will go to IMF.
Okay.
It
So
will-
so once you go to IMF, you stay in IMF?
It stays there, the interest.
Right, 'cause it's a dedicated fund.
Different,
Right.
it's different businesses.
So this transfer is just a one-time like phenomenon from the general fund to the IMF that we're using to fund distinct capital projects?
Correct.
Gotcha.
So for example, Jim, in interest for next year, $350,000.
But that stays in
That's,
IMF
it's
once
in
the funds are
IMF,
transferred?
right.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
So,
It's
yeah,
a separate
Kim,
set of books.
You mentioned 4 components. One is the back alley, street, sidewalk, and ADA. How much money is coming from general fund and how much money is coming from sales tax to pay for that?
Let me see yours. So, sales tax, that was presented last Monday. We're budgeting as if the rule is in effect. So the sales tax budgeted in IMF was 3.9. And then we're showing the transfer, that's 32.2. Okay, but 31 million of that is for facilities and traffic. So it was about 1.6 is what we're moving from the general fund to IMF for more streets, alleys, and sidewalks. So you have the 3.9 for streets, and then you have the 1,656,000 for streets, alleys, and sidewalks.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand, you said there's no money is used from $31 million transfer for street, sidewalk, back alley, and ADA.
Correct.
But you just said transfer the money.
Transfer 1.6 million from the general fund. I'm gonna say this hopefully the right way. Continue to think of the $31 million different.
Yep.
The 1.6, to her point, traditionally, let's use that term, traditionally, from year-over-year budget, the 1.6 is what's being transferred in
From general fund.
from general fund.
And sales tax? From the IMF fund?
Sales
Because we are-
tax, she just said it was what, 3.9 million?
Okay.
But if I understand the question, sales tax, there's no, how can I say this? The 1.6 million that gets transferred, we don't divide it up between sales tax and property tax and franchise fees and everything like that. So there's no division
Yeah.
of the
I
1.6?
understand, 1% of sales tax is coming to general fund. Yeah.
Okay.
I know that.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're all on the
Yeah,
same
that's
page.
plus the sales tax revenue for the IMR.
Correct.
Yes.
Good? Okay.
But I'm done. I have a, probably goes back to my original problem. So Public Works really is going down. We're spending less on Public Works this year. So even with increased salaries, what are we not having to spend, I guess? What's allowing us to shave?
Well, I wouldn't say that we're spending less on public works because part of public works is facilities and traffic, and you're spending 31 million on that.
Over time.
Over time, you're transferring money over there. So, we've just removed the transfer from public works. We've removed the 190,000 transfer from traffic, from the traffic division, and we've removed the 1.2 million for facilities from that division, because we are taking basically fund balance of the general fund to fund those two items for many years. Is that?
So this is still not apples and oranges. I mean, this is still not apples and apples then, like year over year,
That
like
was
what we're
the,
spending.
that was the yes and.
Right.
Correct.
It's not, so we're not decreasing Public Works. That's,
That's the difficulty I was having.
We are not decreasing the care of our infrastructure.
I mean,
No,
technically,
that
we're
is not
spending more
happening.
than last year, but the graph shows that we're spending less.
okay.
Okay.
You froze the picture.
Never getting off this.
Can you,
Stay on this ground.
is it us or is it me?
It's my smooth, dulcet voice.
It-
It makes the presentation go to sleep.
Yeah, it's Manny, it's not.
No, it's called numbers.
The laptop went to sleep. Jared?
When do we get to the budget on the AB?
Yeah.
We're spending it this
When do we, how much are we spending on AB?
We can go to page 14 in your packet.
Yeah, there you go. Let's do that.
Old paper.
I see. He doesn't have
Could I ask a quick question in the interim period here? Going back to page 4,
Okay.
and I don't know that you'll have this information, but I was just curious if y'all have heard anything.
Yes.
What, any sense for why the taxable value of the commercial industrial went up almost 32%? I mean, it's not new construction, right?
Well, if you look
they-
up,
are they
if you
finally
look,
going after
it's reappraisals.
Right.
Really, if you look at they have for commercial 871 million, 470,000 in reappraisals for commercial.
Yeah,
And the commercial also includes your business personal property, which right now is,
that went up
seen
almost
it-
11%.
yeah, mhm.
So is it just that they finally maxed out on pirating up all the values for homes and now they're going after the commercial property?
Well, they did 617 million of reappraisals for homes for
Yeah,
residential.
no doubt. That's
Yeah.
gone sky high too, but it looks like they finally woke up and realized that, I mean, 31%, almost 32% is pretty amazing in a single year.
Well, we don't know where it'll end up.
Fair
We'll know
enough,
next
fair
Monday.
enough.
It'll be
No, yeah.
curious to see what happens.
Nostradamus, I am not. Thank you, Kim.
Uh-huh, right there. It works.
And Jim,
Thank
just real
you.
quickly,
Yes,
the
sir.
most volatile is that business and personal property.
Yeah, why is that?
It's all about challenges and inventory,
Okay.
you know, in terms of when they go down the appraisal district,
They tend to be a little bit more
Well, they,
allowing them to
so
grant
it's just
challenges?
volatile from year to year and for business to business, depending on what's going on.
Yeah, okay.
So it's the,
have a lot more challenges than your residential.
absolutely. There's more money.
Well, I would think particularly this year, which will have 32%. That's a,
Ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
that's eye-watering.
Page 14.
Okay, so page 14 is on the screen also. It's this slide shows total fund balance is projected to be 111.3 million at September 30th of 2025. This is a decrease of about 31 million, which is the amount of the transfer to IMF. I also left in your packet, you can see the big zero, and it says for IMF traffic and facility projects. And it's zero now because now it's included up in your expenditure amount. Okay, on page 14, you can see that's why your expenditures are 105 million, is because we've increased those expenditures for the $31 million transfer. It's no longer going to be in the general fund, it's going to be in IMF if the proposed budget is adopted. Okay? So this slide shows the results of the classifications that were included in the excess revenue allocation guidelines that we discussed at the June council retreat. The guidelines are also on page 21 of your packet. It also includes the requirements included in the fund balance policy, which begins on page 22 of your packet. The fund balance is required to be broken out by the categories shown. So by non-spendable, committed, assigned, and unassigned. That's for financial reporting purposes, so we like to keep that for budget purposes. The non-spendable is the 10% of budgeted expenditures required by charter. The committed category includes the 15% of expenditures included in the fund balance policy. And then the assigned is the areas covered by the excess revenue allocation guidelines. And then the last category is unassigned, and that's where you find the undesignated fund balance. And the fund balance policy requires undesignated fund balance to be maintained at 50% of budgeted expenditures. So do you have any questions on the fund balance walkthrough?
No, but Ramesh had a question before that.
Thank you, Mayor. Kim, back on page 14, the top box where you have the less budgeted expenditures fiscal year 25. I see the 105,609,000. That includes the $31 million. So my understanding was that 31 million, sorry, let me restate my question. When I look at this line, to me, it feels like we are planning to spend 105,609,000 next year. Is that a wrong assumption?
We are not spending that $31 million in 1 year.
The budgeted expenditure FY25 threw me off.
I understand, but that's from an accounting standpoint.
Okay.
I have to get it out of the fund somehow. The only way I can get it out of the fund is to run it through your income statement. Right, so I have to show it as an expenditure of the general fund, and then I show it as a revenue of the infrastructure maintenance fund. So the net impact, if you were just to consider the whole government
The entire
of
budget.
the city as one fund, the net impact would be zero. Because your revenues are 31 million in one fund, your expenditures are 31, they net out to zero. You are not spending 31, you're just moving money from one business entity to another business entity.
Okay.
Okay, from one bucket to another.
Just an introductory
From
transfer.
your wife's checking account to yours, or maybe the other way around.
It's other way around.
Jim, did you?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Remind me, what's the DART project?
Tracy, can you help me with that?
So that is, in partnership with DART, we have installed a number of enhancements to all of the improvements that are coming through our community.
Okay.
So if you'll notice, it's things like,
Our
for
logo on
the
some
crossing,
concrete.
yes,
Yeah,
on
yeah.
South Beltline, we've got the rusticated bands, we've added painting, we've added upgraded fencing. Those are the types of things that money will.
It was the
fund.
upgrades that we asked for.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
And here's the deal, we don't know when they're ever gonna ask us for that money.
Well, given their.
We know that they're
I won't
going
say
to,
that
we
since
just
we're on
don't
the
know
record.
when. So when that day comes, that'll be in the middle of this.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mike.
Are we good?
Yes.
I've got a question. The strategic reserve, is that just a flat number? Is that just the X, whatever didn't fit anywhere else, basically? We just assign it to strategic reserve, right?
We do.
Because the bottom number, the 37 million, that's the 50, that's
That is
calculated
the
at 50%.
50, right. And the strategic reserve, that's all about, if the rule goes into effect, this helps us
Yep, smooth
figure out what we're gonna do.
Smooth out
Instead
for
of
the future.
taking a buzz cut, we can
Right, okay, that
take a
makes sense.
haircut, right?
And just philosophically, you know, we have to do 50%, the unreserved, undesignated has to be 50% of budgeted expenditures.
Right.
Philosophically,
That's y'all's policy.
And I did.
that's
I-
ours.
So,
It's not chartered.
right, that is, it's just our policy, and I take it, I removed that one-time transfer to calculate that. I didn't take it of 105 million, I took
Right,
it
right.
the 74,
75,
yeah.
74 something,
yeah.
yes.
I was gonna make a comment kind of to that. The guidelines of fund balance policies, those are just policies. Those were set by us, and have been modified over time. They're not fixed. I mean, we can change them if there's a reason to change them. There's reasons why the numbers are there. Some of it has to do with the, rating audit, et cetera, but so those are always negotiable.
Okay. And the 15% was also just policy. That's just our policy also, right? So it's actually 65%.
Y'all are kinda jumping ahead.
Well, in addition, philosophically though, let's say all this assigned, these funds weren't here and we didn't have $37 million undesignated, would we just, I guess, per the policy, we would just fund that undesignated or unreserved spot would be just whatever was left? I mean, if the money wasn't there, if the funds weren't there,
Can I?
we couldn't hit 50%.
Yeah, let me suggest though, I don't see, at least for us, we won't let you get there.
The policy also has a replenishment
Okay.
section where what do you do if anything falls outside of the policy?
Oh, okay, so it has
Yeah.
remedies or something like that, okay. So I'm jumping ahead on the 15% plus the 50. Okay,
That's another section.
okay, sorry.
So, let's move on to council's budget. Oops. And so council's budget can be found on page 15 and 16. Page 15 provides an overview of council's budget, and then page 16 provides the line item details of council's budget. The line item detail does include the direction given last Monday regarding the service organization request. It does not include anything additional for Special Olympics. I think we sent out an email sharing with you what we received from Special Olympics, and so we're waiting for further direction on if you want anything additional included. So based on the information before you, council's budget is increasing $146,920 over fiscal year 24 adopted budget. And the primary reasons for the increase in council's budget are the fiscal year 25 proposed includes $20,000 for a community engagement survey. It includes $75,000 for a refresh of the 2040 strategic plan. It increased council's training budget by $15,000, and then it increased legislative travel by $20,000 because fiscal year 25 is a legislative year. So that is really the reason that your budget went up, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yes, Kevin?
Could you talk to me a little bit more about the refresh of the 2040?
I think Tracy. I sure can.
Hey, Teresa.
Yes,
That was a nice little choreographed
Yes, it
head
just kind of-
switch there from my angle.
yes.
That was good.
So that fiscal year 25 is our 5-year mark. And so what we, consistent with what we have done during the 5-year mark for 2030, we will be inviting a facilitator to come in and help us facilitate some conversations with our community to kind of do just a check-in on how we're doing with the plan, get some feedback from the community around their perceptions of how the plan is going, if it's still applicable, those types of things. So that's what that funding will help us walk through with the community.
Is the vision of that, does that include like council feedback on how like we think the plan is going as well as the citizen?
100%.
Okay, all right, because.
Yes, we
Okay.
learned many things during the initial development of the plan itself, and one of those lessons learned is that while it is the community's plan, the council needs to have more engagement with that process in order to really kind of feel and understand where, how that is all developed and how it's shaking out.
Are we engaging the same firm that built the plan?
Well, it will be an RFP, and it will be open, but we have not, I've not had any conversations. There are no discussions around specifically engaging with Future IQ.
I look forward to revisiting
Sure.
that plan. All right, excellent.
Just keep in mind
Yes, sir.
that we as a council decided to keep our hands off until the final.
I was not on council at that time, Mayor.
I
He was
know,
on the
that's why
steering committee.
I was on the steering committee,
That's why I'm
Recommended this
That's
thing.
why I'm reminding you, that's why I'm reminding you as a council member now that we decided at the point to let the system take its course and review.
Noted, Mayor.
And all that will be coming back to,
So the mayor pro tem is criticizing the steering committee that he was on?
No, not at all. Not at all. It's, you learn a lot from seeing a plan from multiple perspectives, I think is what I'm alluding at, so.
Oh, I thought you were wondering why we let the committee have so much freedom during the process.
I wonder that as well, sir. No, that's good information. Thank you so much for answering that.
So before Kim moves on, she made a comment. There was discussion at last Monday's meeting about specifically Special Olympics and Love Thy Neighbor. If there's any desire to alter those numbers, time's kind of coming down.
So, I'm sorry, I thought it was my understanding that we were gonna wrap that up at the end, but you want feedback now?
Anytime during this meeting.
Yes.
All right, stand by.
Can I ask about the training expense, or what, maybe you're the one to ask? What training does council, what training
So you
expense
have,
is that?
you have
And it's-
TML,
Okay,
and then some of you have attended some other additional TML type of training.
okay.
And then there is the North Texas Commission. I think, TJ, you're going to be in that class this year, aren't you?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's
You're doing leadership?
Yeah.
training.
Good.
Okay.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
So TML falls in, so
Yeah,
all those type
TML,
of things. Okay.
NTC, anything that y'all do with any of the, I'm just gonna say National League of Cities or
US
the
Conference
mayor,
of Mayors.
US Conference of Mayors.
Okay,
those
that makes
kind of
sense.
things.
But I did notice it was projected to go up also.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because I think next year it's actually in Fort Worth, TML, if I remember right. And so
Oh.
we'll be closer to home, but that doesn't mean that you won't stay, you know, do those kind of things.
This-
This year it's in Houston.
But is this, so this doesn't cover Houston?
This, yes, this,
This budget would cover Houston though, wouldn't it?
Yes.
it's because it's
October.
incurred right now. Yeah, the expense is being incurred right now with registration and everything.
Oh, so it's, okay.
Right,
Okay.
Ashley?
Yes,
Yeah.
and the hotels and everything would come after that.
Right.
Negotiations, yeah.
Right.
That's not confusing at all.
Welcome to the change of fiscal year. So it's the same way.
Okay.
So Kim, in the past year, we included a storage expense at the council budget for the drama people. Where did we move that to?
So the theater has to, do you have that? The theater has to submit a request, just like all of the other service orgs, and they pay for that themselves now.
Okay, so
Based
it's
on-
not coming from our budget, okay.
Right, and how much did they? They requested 12,000
Okay.
again, so that was consistent with last year. Yeah.
Brianna.
Hey, quick question, on the, going back to the training, does that also include like the luncheons that we go to? For different, like, chamber lunches or North Texas Commission or
Tracy's
anything?
nodding her head saying yes. I'm
Is
looking
that
at the
also it?
table.
Okay.
Because it's not, everything else in there, just the membership fee, not like if I go to something. Now, some of those, we get a table at some events, it's
Right.
included within that, but there are many events that that registration is not included.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Okay, so the next section is debt service fund.
Hang on.
Mayor,
Sorry.
just a quick question. So I did get a response from Patty Simmons, who was presented at Special Olympics. I don't have a firm number to present to everyone, but basically she just said that she had inclination to host an in-season basketball tournament and things like that. Let's hear. She said, she basically asked me, like, would we have some time to explore what we would like to prioritize and come up with a dollar figure? So I wanted to make sure that the council heard that sentence, because she's obviously interested in trying to do something. There was also something, I think, about swimming or something like that, or securing a venue for CISD gyms. There's a couple things there. I think that they just wanted to know, like, I guess what kind of time that they would need to explore, you know, what if we're offering additional funds, like what would be the best use of that. So
So we would need to know to be able to present to you next on the 29th, because that budget then becomes the proposed budget that we file and have to have filed by August 5th.
so if I reply to her today and just say, if you could get us a dollar figure before, and then I could, like,
So,
how
do you
I'm
not
trying not to
have-
overstep my
do you
bounds
not
as a
have the
single
email that
council
we-
member
we-
and wanted to share information.
It's in, she was pretty thorough, I mean,
She gave a pretty,
a
if you
pretty
look at
thorough
that email
that we
sent
forwarded.
out.
Oh, that's the email that came from you, got with like the swimming and stuff like that.
Yes.
Sorry, I was having a conversation with her as well,
Yeah,
so, okay.
So in that, she gave a breakdown of all the, quote, uncovered expenses is the way she said it.
Got it, okay.
And
I couldn't find that email. I'm sorry.
I actually, you know, I am aligned with Kevin. She gave us a breakdown, but now, because she's not asked for a number, we have to decide if we're going to approve 2 of them or all of them.
Where'd that email come from? I apologize.
It came on Friday at 3 p.m.
Friday, 3 p.m. Ah, here we go. Got it. Ah, yeah. here we go. That's what I was looking for.
I think it's that.
Let's take about a 5-minute recess while Kevin looks this up and, what's that? It is 7:37. 7:45.
friend that's diabetic, he calls it, it split the skin on his heel. So it's not, you would think it's horrible, right? But it won't heal because of the stone. So he's just had this open wound on his foot.
Time is 7:45, we're going to reconvene into the work session.
Okay, yes,
And
I have a proposal.
I believe Mayor Pro Tem has a proposal.
Okay, finding the email that I was looking for, so Ms. Patty Simmons, she had sent in a couple of items, so she has a couple of unfunded items, so I'm proposing that we fund $2,750 for swim team swimsuits, and then we also fund $2,201, because that's what she asked for specifically.
You can round numbers.
So I guess whatever that math is, so 49.
Wonderful color.
Yeah, we're going 5,000.
And
all right?
$1.
No, we're not. We're going to stay out of the dollar. Okay. So what I'm proposing is we fund $5,000 in addition to what they asked for to cover the swimsuits and their state swim meet, like the nights there. And then on the Love Thy Neighbor, they sent in some information about that. So I think they asked for $2,000. So I'm proposing that we give them an extra $1,000 to bring it to $3,000 to cover some of their additional. I know that they said they had some other asks and stuff like that. So in total, $8 grand. No, I'm sorry, $6 grand additional. That $5,000 for Special Olympics and $1,000 extra for Love Thy Neighbor. That's what I'm proposing. There we go.
I'm good.
We're not going to do a vote, but can I get a thumbs up that this will be included in Kim's budget next week? I see 3, 4.
Once you
You're
lower it
good,
from 8
Kim.
to 6.
Well, I
you're
mean,
happy. Yeah.
that
Your
$2,000 delta
negotiating
just sold
skills
it.
are
There's a
amazing.
transfer to the IMF in there.
It'll just be a one-time transfer.
Dawn,
30
I want to
It's
see you in
31
my
million and
office.
$8,000.
You may call it the office.
31,008,000. That's the total transfer.
No, we're going to take Don over to Kevin's
Do not
garage
push.
studio.
All right.
Thanks, guys. I know they'll appreciate that.
Okay, thank you, we appreciate that information. So, okay, the next area is debt service. It's on page 17 of your packet.
Excuse me.
That is where you can find.
This is also item number 7 on our agenda.
Yes. This slide is on page 17 of your packet. This fund's revenue source is only from the INS portion of the property tax rate, and it can only be, the INS portion of the property tax rate can only be set at the amount needed to generate enough revenue to cover the principal and interest payments due during the year. The fiscal year 25 proposed budget includes property tax revenue that will be generated if property values grow 7% and we maintain the INS portion of the property tax rate at the current rate of 0.070152. That was discussed earlier this evening. And at your council retreat in June, this was the strategy that was presented at that retreat. So the total property tax supported principal and interest due in fiscal year 25 is $8,469,645, and that's what's shown on page 18 in your packet. It is the top number in the third column under total. However, the current property tax rate at a 7% growth in values will only generate $7,889,969, which is the property tax revenue shown at the top of page 17 of your packet. Fund balance of the debt service fund will be used to cover the difference between property tax revenue provided by the INS tax rate and the principal and interest payments due in fiscal year 25. A portion of the debt service fund's fund balance can be used, and the fund will still have a fund balance level that complies with the city's fund balance policy. Again, use of the fund balance is a strategy that was provided to you at your June retreat. The strategy is to first use the excess fund balance of the debt service fund, and then we would start using the amount that we have set aside in the general fund's fund balance. We have $2 million set aside there. And so that would be used in future years. So, okay. So just also to point out that the property tax revenue shown in this pie chart includes $20,000 that is expected to be received from penalties and interest on delinquent taxes. That's why that amount for property taxes is 7.9, but when you look at page 17, you see 7.8. Okay, I just wanted to make sure you understood the difference there. The transfer in of the 3.4 million that's shown up there, that represents the transfer from Water Sewer Fund and from CRDC for their share of penalties and interest on certificate of obligations issued for water and sewer and CRDC projects, because water sewer revenues and CRDC sales tax is being used to pay for the bonds issued for those projects. So the total principal and interest shown on the graph is about 11.9 million, and that is the total principal and interest due on all outstanding certificate of obligation debt. That's the debt issued for general projects as well as water sewer projects as well as CRDC projects. And if you recall, we began showing all CO debt regardless of the funding source in this fund so that we provided more transparency to the public on the amount of COs outstanding. And that's because if anything were to happen to the revenue source of water sewer or to CRDC, property taxes would have to be set to cover all CO debt. Now, we don't anticipate that happening, but just for transparency purposes. And then page 18 of your packet, it shows a schedule for total tax supported debt. The current principal amount of bonds outstanding is about $104.6 million. That does include the bond issue that was just passed by council on July 9th. 52% of outstanding bonds will be, on page 18, will be paid off in 2034, and then 80% would be paid off by 2039. Did I say 2034? Goodness. Yeah. Would be paid off in 2034, and then 80% would be paid off in 2039. Do you have any questions regarding debt service?
Kim, just a question. So, obviously seeing the difference in there, that that transfer in on there. So my question is that so we've got $2 million set aside on that fund balance line item for the INS property tax rate stabilization. You said in your presentation there that was like for the next couple of years we're gonna use that. Is that right?
So the presentation that Jason prepared for us, it had using debt service fund balance for a couple of years.
Yep.
And then it had using general fund balance for a few years after that.
Okay.
The total amount needed was about $2 million of the general fund. And so that's why you see in this fund balance, you see the $2 million down here. It's INS property tax rate stabilization.
Yep.
So that's what that is. It stays there because we're not using any of it yet.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But so that's going to be used. So you said we're going to use that fund balance in a couple of years.
Correct.
What you're saying. So
Potentially, because
Potentially.
Potentially.
the numbers that they were using on the projection, again, was pretty much a flat number as
Okay.
far as growth. So if we have any growth
Fair.
in value, it means less that would have to be cut potentially for.
And that might actually answer my question, because, you know, obviously, kind of looking to the next 8, 9 years, that, you know, that total on the schedule here of debt is about, you know, kind of that 8.4, 8.5, 8.6. So that's why I was kind of at, what's the long-term strategy look like for that? And I mean, is that just that growth and that balance with the, you know, the INS and M&O and?
The set aside, the 2 million, is based on what Jason gave us.
Mhm.
Any growth that we get means that we're not using that. So your strategy is, we have it set aside,
Yep.
it's ready to go, there's the fund balance, ready to go.
Yep.
And then as growth happens, you're just using less and less of those dollars.
Got it. Okay. I'm just curious. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
So Kim, on that $44 million in COs that we just approved, I guess, I mean, those aren't all going to be sold in this year, right?
Yes, they are.
They are. So the 4 to 5% yield is pretty much where we're going to end up then.
Well, no. So, I mean, that's the face value of the interest rate on those bonds, but because Jason told you that we got a premium
Right.
of several $1 million,
Yeah.
the effective interest rate is 3% something.
Yeah.
That was about 3.8, 3.9.
Yeah, I was,
Yeah.
like, so the effective interest rate, it's 3.782.
Okay. But
Is
we've
the
got
effective-
we've got to book it at.
And we
All
earned,
right.
the bond premium was about almost 4.5 million.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and the 44 million, the 44.7 that you're seeing, that's for the general projects. And then we issued almost 4.7 for water sewer projects.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
so the total issue was 49, almost 49.4.
Right.
And thank you, Mayor. The premium that we had when we issued that bond, let's say it's about 4.5 million?
Mhm.
Do we book it as revenue this year, or do we spread it over the life of the bond?
So it gets recorded, Vanessa, you wanna help me? So it gets recorded,
You're on.
it gets recorded in the bond projects, and then it's amortized over the life of the bonds.
Thank you.
Mhm. Good, okay. So, next we are we've already kind of talked about the fund balance policy. All I want to say is it's in your packet. August of last year is the last time that it was brought forward, and that's when we made the changes. We added the 50% of undesignated, that we were going to do 50% of budgeted expenditures as undesignated for general fund. We also added the HOT, policy for the HOT, and a couple of other ones. Let me look real quick. We added HOT and DUD. We added those two to the policy. I am not recommending any changes to the fund balance policy at this time. We just discussed and made changes to the guidelines at your June. So this is just here so you see this is what you have, and at this time we're not recommending changes unless there's something you want to see differently. Good. And so then I am going to turn item number 9 over to Jessica. Did you want to just real quick? Go ahead.
Right now, we're going to come up around with the initial proposed budget. We'll talk about it shortly.
We didn't put this in your packet because
Sure.
it's really only for legislative purposes. It means nothing. Truly, it means nothing. It is something SB2 makes us do. We have to file an initial proposed budget. It's all based on guesstimates of a property tax rate and values. And now we have feedback from y'all of things that we need to input into the budget. So really, the budget that you get on the 9th is the one. But for legalities, Jessica is going to present those to you.
So tonight, we present to you the fiscal year 25 initial proposed budget. Each year, the city of Coppell is required by local government code 102 to publish a proposed budget prior to the 30th day before the City Council approves a tax rate. Beginning with the fiscal year 2021, Senate Bill 2 imposed an earlier condensed schedule for budget and tax rate adoption. The initial proposed budget is a legal requirement, as Kim stated. This document is created before receiving certified values on July 25th. These conflicting deadlines cause staff to publish a proposed budget using estimates. The initial proposed budget and the estimated tax rate are not what council will take action on during the August 27 meeting. This draft is published exclusively to meet the city's legal requirements and obligations. A full-length proposed budget will be available for public review by August the 5th, as required by charter on that deadline. At this time, we'll take any questions.
So move this forward if there's.
Basically, it is a legislatively required
Right, it's
document
legally legislative required
that
documents.
you don't even have numbers to verify until after Thursday. And then on Friday on the 29th, you'll actually have, here's where we are from a budget standpoint. But this gives you at least some insight to the way things are looking. So that part has a little bit of value.
Correct, yeah.
But as far as saying, I don't like this or I don't like that, it's really irrelevant until we see the preliminary appraised values on Thursday.
We received
The
that
final.
on the 23rd.
Is it final?
Yeah, the 27th.
We'll receive,
25th.
the 25th we'll receive certified values, we'll start working on the tax rate, so you'll know,
What we actually have.
what we have on the 29th. It's not certified till the county certifies it. We've been right, you know, our calculation has been correct and in agreement with the county. And then we move into starting all the postings. We have to post, you know, that you'll vote on a maximum tax rate. Because the first meeting in August, you'll vote on a maximum tax rate. You're not setting the tax rate. You're just voting on what we can advertise as the maximum tax rate that you will consider when you vote on the tax rate in the budget.
Question on page 2, on the revenue side, it says sales tax is projected to decrease 35% from prior year's amended budget. But we are still collecting that tax.
Right, because we're budgeting as if the rule's in effect, and that's why we have to explain the difference, right? Amended budget is, because we're still collecting, so it's higher.
Because the amended still includes the additional, like,
Yeah, just like this past year after the audit was done, we did amended budget for sales tax, and where she projected out, this is how much we're actually gonna collect versus, have to think in terms of adopted budget versus amended.
it's almost adopted and proposed at this point.
Right
Are
now, it's
the-
adopted, amended, and proposed.
Yeah. That's the closest apples to apples is the.
So is page 24
The
basically the
adopted
summary,
fund.
the bottom line on all of it? It's all funds,
That's what.
walk forward.
That is, right, Jessica?
Because that is.
Yeah.
3.30.
Yes.
Yes. That's how.
That's a good way to look at it.
Subject to change, basically.
Yeah, it's all,
Subject to change. Until we get the certified tax.
And when do we get the certified values?
Thursday.
Thursday? Wow.
And you said Denton County's already supplied?
They emailed out today that their certified values are available. I did not go out and look at them because they're such a small. The last time I looked at what they were at 249 million, so they're really a small portion of our value.
Thank you, Mayor. Kim, stop me if I'm jumping ahead of schedule. We're on page 2, under expenditures, you have budgeted expenditures totaling a number which is a 25.14 increase. Are you planning to cover that in later slides?
So that That is the total of all funds,
Mhm.
so that's the total on page 24.
Okay.
And that would include the 31 million
Mhm.
that we've been talking about.
Mhm.
So,
The infamous
I'm not
31
covering
million.
anything in this proposed budget.
Okay. The infamous 31 million, okay.
Yeah.
Do we even put this in our notebooks?
You can put it, because we have to share it with you.
Yeah.
Because this will go on our website. We have to file it with the city secretary, and she has to make it available on the website.
We can't.
So you can have it, you can put it in there, but it tells you where you are today, right?
No, I just put it in my.
Yeah.
That's what I want to know.
Kim, on page 24, the line, the individual numbers all come from the previous sections that we covered, correct? And if you wanted to see what drove the increase last year versus this year, again, I'd go back to that individual sections to see.
I would probably go to your notebook, wouldn't you say? I would use what we've handed out to you. I think it's easier
Mhm.
to read. So if you look at all of the items in your notebook from last Monday,
Mhm.
which is all the special revenue funds and water sewer,
Mhm.
that's where I would look, because I think it's easier to read.
Mhm.
I think this doesn't, it's not reader friendly in my opinion, how we have to pull it together.
Mhm.
So that would be my recommendation.
So the format for this is even specified by statute effectively?
Somewhat,
Yeah.
it is somewhat, tells us what we have to have in it.
These, like the $180 million in expenditures, that is an overstatement from what's actually being spent, correct? Because that includes transfers.
Correct.
Same thing on, some of those revenues and expenditures technically should net out.
Right, it's like if you did a consolidation, if you had a company,
It would
you would
show.
have to eliminate those from your financial
Okay,
statements.
so this is just adding across the columns.
Correct.
Okay.
Thanks for asking that, Don. So is there a number that we can arrive at the net of transfers? So if transfers is, let's say, 6 million for next year, so I'm trying to get a better understanding of what is it that we're spending next year. So if it is not 180, it is 180 net of the transfers, I'd like to understand what the number is.
That will be produced. It's part of the process when we come together,
Can I see
excuse
the
me,
budget book?
on the 29th.
We have something like
It'll-
that, right? It's just
That 180, there'll be, but if you pull your budget right now, you can look across your budget right now to get to what the total expenditures are. It'll be presented in that format. So if you pull this budget, you can see all the way across the board, total expenditures for the city. That's what you're asking, right?
Yes.
So yes, it will be presented in that format.
Thank you, sir.
This is just a document that they prepare for statutory compliance, but it's before we have any kind of solid number.
That is not bound.
Fair enough, fair enough. But
Right.
the plan to spend money, I'm assuming there must have been some assumptions for them to come up with this number.
So,
So they-
can I interject? So, August 5th, we file a document like this.
Mhm.
So, after the 29th, we present to you where we're at. On the 29th, you'll know where we're at for values, you'll know where we're at for property tax rate. So, we'll have incorporated any feedback you've given us over the last 2 meetings into all of the funds. And we will show that to you on the 29th, and then we will produce this document. It won't be bound, it'll be in a notebook. We can give you all a copy of that if you want. We file it on it's put on the website, and it's filed with the city secretary. And in here, there is a summary of revenues and expenditures for
Page
all
31.
funds. Page 31. So that will show you.
In this book.
Yeah, I'm just making a note because I
And it-
didn't bring the book.
Right, and it shows you all of the expenditures. Again, I think what you're asking is, a transfer is not a cash out the door,
Mhm.
okay? It's just moving money from one fund to another,
Which I
and
understand.
then,
Yeah, that's what I understand, yeah. Jim, going back to your previous comment, I'm kind of making the assumption that the revenue side is not fixed because we are dependent on the property tax assessment. But the expenditure side, I'm assuming we would know more because we have had history over the past years. We spent, let's say, 75 million last year, and this year we plan to spend 75 plus or minus 2 or 3, whatever. Right? So I'm assuming that we are closer to knowing what we want to spend, and I just wanted to get to that number so we can do it.
You bet.
Thank you.
And I think the other thing that you have to keep in mind is our special revenue funds. Revenues minus expenditures aren't necessarily going to be a positive. Because a lot of our
Yes.
special revenue funds, we are spending fund balance
Right.
purposely. Because you gather it up and then you get a project and it takes time over the years to spend that, so. That's all we have.
So you're done?
You're done.
Okay. Thank you very much. Anybody have any last questions for Kim?
Thank
No,
you.
that was really good.
I need to bring a whiteboard so we can.
No, you're doing great. You don't
Right
need
now
to
that
do
is really
anything
good.
else.
Sometimes visual.
You have a whiteboard behind.
I know.
I think Don and I.
You've been in her office, haven't you? You've seen all that on there.
I have 2 whiteboards. I'm a visual person.
All right. Any other closing comments before we go to item number 11? Mike?
I have to ask this question because of the way things have kind of gone down for the last few years. Understanding that, from a policy standpoint, we've taken the direction, the objective is the 3.49%, because of SB2 and the sales tax issue. So that's what we're going into this with as far as our guide for expenditures. The capital projects, she's gone through them, she's identified what those capital projects, we have the ongoing maintenance, the ongoing projects that we do in the community. The CRDC approved their budget for next year as far as it's, inclusive of projects that they're posted right now for what's going on. So is there any particular project or something that y'all are interested in collectively or whatever that we have not taken into account yet? Taking into account that you gave us your 2040 vision, you've given us, through the retreat, different aspects or inputs. You know what's coming down the pike. So is there anything about, forgetting for a moment the level of this to that, to this to that, transfer to not transfer and all that kind of conversation, is there anything that y'all are, hey, have we given some consideration to doing that? And if so, can we see what that would look like and what the impact would be on the budget, right? So it's an open-ended question because I don't want to have us get into late in the game and then have something pop up and it's like, okay, that's not the best place to be.
Bijou and then Ramesh.
Just for a discussion purpose, when I look at these numbers, on page 4, we are going to increase the property valuation by $1.7 billion. That's 16% increase. But we are still, I'm looking at from the citizens' perspective, we're still asking them to pay more taxes. We show the breakdown here today by $10 or whatever the number is. So how do we explain to the citizens, hey, we got this much increase in property valuation, but we are still spending more money and you have to pay more?
One explanation would be it costs us more to do business. Our electricity costs more, our gas costs more, the everyday maintenance of that, as far as concrete costs more, the things that we do cost us more as well. So again, if you don't want us to do certain things, it's pretty simple to come to you and say, these are less. We'll just do less of, not what we're doing now. We're not necessarily taking on more programs. We're not necessarily taking on more projects. The projects as far as ongoing projects, but as far as capital projects, that's part of the expenditure more. So you can go and look and say, well, this is what we're doing. We're purchasing these things, we're buying these things, we're doing these things. So you can go point to those things. Does that help you? Our expense, I think her comment, when you compare 2019 to 2025, and our overall expenses basically only increased by 3%. I would say that's a pretty good story to tell to the community.
Especially when you had an interest rate or a inflation rate of 7% one year, 5% another, and then 4% last year or something like that.
But I appreciate the question. Everyone sitting around this table generally is a taxpayer, right?
And I particularly appreciate the discussion on why, Jim, when you have a senior exemption, why your percentage actually goes up.
Yeah.
That is completely contrary, but you get into it, it's like, oh yeah, understand. Ramesh?
Thank you, Mayor. Again, from my selfish standpoint, once we finalize the budget, you're out and about meeting residents, and they might ask, why was this project not funded? So I would love to have a discussion on like the 4 or 5 projects that fell below the funding line, and get an understanding of some of the reasons that we can share with the residents on why that did not go above the line.
Do you have projects in mind?
I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming that you
I think the question is, from our perspective, is what is it that the council would like to see us do?
And Mike, I don't have the list of all the projects.
Well, no,
that
but
have been
what
there.
projects, this was the conversation that we had the other day. Is there something that's not being done
No,
that the citizens are telling you, hey, we'd like to see this done? Because the projects we're talking about, they're not truly projects. They're pieces of equipment, right? They're capital, they're a truck here or a backhoe there, or, right? So it's your terminology or our terminology of
It's probably different.
It's different.
Again, from the environment that I come in, we have all the asks recorded as a project. And some of them we have the money to do, and some of them will say, we don't have the money this year, we'll move it to next year. So
Yeah, I'm trying to keep y'all focused on policy. And, in terms of your expenditures, and to your point about controlling your expenditures and everything along those lines, we've identified where the additional expenditures are going specifically. So if you want to see a list of things that aren't getting funded, they're not getting funded because we're presenting to you a balanced budget. And they're based on the priorities of the directors. This is the conversation that we have.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I'm assuming there's a list somewhere. And if you're saying there's no list, I'll take your word for it.
There is a list.
Okay.
I guess I'm challenging the idea of I want you as a council, as an elected official, at policy level. If you're going to get into, and in particular, now this is where you and I may disagree. If you're going to get into whether I buy that mower or that trailer or that, because that's what's on the list. And if that's a debate that you want this council to get into, I want to turn to the mayor and say, is that really what the conversation y'all want to be having?
No, if you're telling us the list has picked this mower versus that mower, it's definitely not the best use of this time.
So let's step back. I'm going to give a hypothetical. Would you like to see more projects done next year?
Yes. You want me to answer the question? I want the highest priority projects done.
You're doing that.
And I will definitely take the word, but in terms of shedding light on the transparency, Is there a list of projects
Yeah,
that we are not doing?
and I've said before, I'm happy to share the list with you. Well, and we can share the list. We have the Excel spreadsheet. We show where, I'll call it above the line, below the line. I just want to make sure that you're spending, and I'm not making a judgment call on this, I'm giving you from my perspective.
And
I want to make
appreciate
sure that you're concentrating on big issues, right, in terms of what's going on.
So, where I was gonna go with that was, if you wanna see more projects done next year, we need to increase the budget.
That's not what I'm talking about, Mayor. I'm saying our budget is the budget. What projects we can do with, given the budget that we have, that is still the council's choice, is my assumption, if that's not right.
We don't get in and pick individual projects that are being done.
Okay?
I mean,
If that's the practice of the
that's-
council, then I'm okay with that.
That's where we rely on our Parks and Rec Board, our Library Board, the boards and commissions to come and present their work plans, and then we adopt that as a budget. If you want to give the Parks and Rec Board a bigger budget, you might assume that that's going to give you a pickleball court quicker, but I don't know that. It may not. There may be something ahead of the pickleball court on their list. But I'm content to let that work through the system until it gets ready for funding. To your point though, there is a list that each one of the boards and commissions and groups has that will be funded when it's available.
But Mike just said he's willing to share that list.
Yes, I'm just, my word of caution is, it is meaningless to you from a standpoint of, we have prioritized it from a departmental standpoint, collectively as an organization, that got built into the budget with the input of CRDC, Parks and Rec Board, Library Board, Smart Board. All that goes into a balanced budget. My thing, I guess I would say to you is, to your particular question is, you set the target. The target was set at 3.499. The revenues, right, in terms of what's going on. So that is my cap on my expenditure.
But we don't need to go up to 3.499 every year, right? We can be below that.
That is the council's direction under the perception of SB2 and the sales tax. If you change that philosophy, that's fine.
So
Right.
we have an agreement that we're going to spend 3.499 every year as a council?
No, we have that conversation in January and at the retreat.
Well, the challenge is 4 people agreed and 3 people left out. And the only time is when the budget season comes, we gotta approve the budget or not.
That's, I can't, that's how this works.
That's how our government works.
Exactly, yes.
But I think what Mike is trying to say
No,
is that.
he already said he's willing to share the list, that's all I have.
Well, like philosophically, what he's trying to say is he doesn't want us picking mowers like that. He wants us saying to the city, oh, we want, do we agree on, 2% increase every year? Do we agree on, like doing the 3.499? Like, that's the level, and then everybody else does their job to figure out what we spend the money on. That's ultimately what I'm hearing. And we did give direction to the city manager that this is our philosophy going forward. We did that in January. And you weren't on council then.
To that point, Mayor Pro Tem, one of the chairs of the different boards that we have talked to me and said, hey, how come our projects are not ever being funded? Right? And I fell back on my discussion with Mike and I said, hey, the city department heads get together and they decide what's the most important project that can be funded. And their impression was that the city council makes that decision. It looks like it's not. And I'm fine with that.
Well, see, I would say to you at that time, turn around and say, what is it? I don't know what that project is that's not being funded.
Mm-hmm.
I know when if it's the smart board, I'm just gonna use that because I know you have the connection to it. The smart board kind of gave the big project,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then it talked about how do we market us as a smart city. Okay, so we built in some funds for that. There's some other things in the portfolios that they have as far as some system issues. Those get done, right? But I can't speak to, that one's more kind of aspirational in some instances. If you remember that presentation, I think you were there. But if the CRDC and the park board say, here are the priorities, right? And then they voted on that. And then they plug that in, and that's where the budget, that's where some of this capital expenditure was identified over the next 5 years. The trails, as an example, right? Some of the park amenities, as an example. Some things that are being done over at the core, as an example. So those get fed into the budget based on the direction that we receive from the various boards. In this budget, we continue to fund for the library, I think it's about $250,000 a year for library book purchases, audio, and other things, right? So that's the feedback that we take, that we build into the particular budget. So I don't want to belabor the point. The question is and this, because it's happened in the past, it's, on when we get into the vote, well, what about if we did something like that? Yes, we can. It takes a minute to say, okay, well then what's it going to replace? Because so I guess that's what I would say to you, is like, okay, if that's, let's say you look at the list and say, well, look, I really want to do that. Okay, based on what? And then we get into that whole KPI conversation.
Brianna?
Well, I think kind of to add to all this, I mean, one of the reasons on the board we have our staff liaison is to help with that check and balance, to bring those items. I mean, one, we have the board come in and report to us, right, what their priorities are. The staff is, I mean, Mike's constantly asking his team and his directors, like, where are the priorities and how do they fit into council priorities that we provide during retreat? How does it fit into either 2040, or how does it fit into what we've designated as priorities, right? And then I think to Mike's point, and maybe what Kevin said as well, is, if there's something in particular that they're like, hey, we've been asking for this for years and it hasn't, then I think that's something that we need to know specifically. Has something fallen off the radar? And making sure that that particular project comes back up to Mike and to the mayor and say, hey, there's a question about this one. But I'll give you an example. I know that for years, a skateboard park was on the Parks and Rec board list. For years. I don't even know if it's still on the list or not, but for years, right? That was on the list. And we kept dropping it to the bottom because we're like, that's not a priority for us. There's other issues, there's liabilities. That's not what we're hearing from the citizens that we need. So it's not to say that they're not coming up with great ideas. That particular project wasn't something that we were ready to fund or willing to fund, and it didn't necessarily fit. And so, again, how do we prioritize what we absolutely need, whether it's streets or lights or a new fire station or whatever it might be, right? Like thinking through some of these different projects. But I would say if you're hearing that there's a particular project that has been on the list for a while and they don't feel like they're getting guidance or answers, then please let them know so that that can come up for discussion. Because maybe Mike can have staff give us an update on something in that particular project.
And keep in mind that this all, and I hate to go back, but in January, we will re-review our prioritization for the city. And that is when those priorities get brought forth. So starting, well, it starts after the budget's adopted, but our main input will be in January. And that really does guide both the staff and consequently the committees and boards and commissions from there on. Kevin?
Thank you. So Bijou, to a point that you brought up earlier about you said something about we don't have to use the 3.499 every year, and that's absolutely true. We have the 3 year, we have the 3 years to be able to go back and go do it, right? So maybe the policy, maybe we have a discussion next January about maybe we adopt a policy of like, we try to look at, instead of every year, maxing the 3.499, maybe we say, we're gonna look at that on a 2-year average and say like, well, could we drop it this year? But if we need it the next year, we could take advantage of that. And go, like, that would be a policy direction that we would wanna give, you know, Mike and staff. And to Mayor's point, that's exactly the type of discussion that we would have in January. But if we give them that policy, then they can go back and go out and build the budget based off of that. And say, we could use it. I mean.
Can I give you a low blow now?
I mean, go for it. I mean, but I mean, that's a policy example.
It is, but, and I'm sorry to blow this, but you don't make the 5th best place to live in the country by cutting your budget down. I mean, I'm very proud of the fact that we, unbeknownst to anybody here, rated number 5 in the country. And we were number 2 in the state. I mean,
You all are proud of that.
Well, and you
We
should.
all are proud of it.
And you should be. And so, you know, I think we're here where we are today because of decisions that we've made in the past. And this council has traditionally made very good, fiscally prudent, sound decisions. So this discussion is part of that. So thank you very much for your inputs. It's very much what we are here to do. We're here to debate, we're here to make the high-end discussions and decisions on that. And I look, like I said in the email, I'll look forward to continuing that with you guys. So anyway, anybody have anything else? Well, let's move on then. And by the way, really appreciate the discussion. You know, we don't get better without debate and compromise and changing direction for the best, and that's what we're here for. Okay, item number 11 is our citizens' appearance. Persons wishing to speak on any item must register and list their address. Presentations by individuals shall be limited to 2 minutes each, and an individual speaker's time may be extended by an additional 2 minutes with the agreement of the majority of the council members present. Person signed up to speak will be called in. Oh. You know, I can't do 2 things at once. So, person signed up to speak will be called in the order that they signed up. No personal attacks by any speaker shall be made against any member of the council, mayor, individual, or corporation. There will be no comments or deliberations from the city council due to the Texas Open Meetings Act. Once the timer sounds at 2 minutes, the city secretary will cut in and ask the council for an extension. And that will be at the discretion of the council. We have... First. I believe we have 2 people that have signed up. Mr. Shaw?
Hopefully I can keep it under 2 minutes. I don't have a prepared statement. I just have a couple of comments, and in light of tonight's discussion, I think they're appropriate. So these are just some observations and...
Name and address, please, sir.
Dave Shop, 215 West Wind Drive, Coppell. Just some observations based on things that are going around the budget. Well, I first off say Kim and her staff and the whole staff does a great job managing the money and all that, but there's a couple of things that somehow don't always hit me quite right. Like the last budget meeting, it was proposed that we had agreed as a city to fund half of the SRO for the school district. And it was immediately approved by the council to go forward with this, to pay the whole amount for this coming year at the request of the CISD, which is fine. We need that program. We need the SROs. I have no problem with that. But that's a whole different area with a whole different budget. And like in the discussions here today, things go in right buckets. Things don't get spread around. I didn't see a whole lot of discussion with it. And here we are taking all this money, which there's a letter being given to Brad Hunt tonight to release debt of $580,000, which I assume a large part, if not all of that, was from you releasing to agree to pay for the other half of the SRO program. I pay 3 times as much property taxes for the school district as I do to run the whole city. And I think their budget's a mess right now because of their changing demographics and everything. And it seems that should have had a little more discussion other than just give it to them. Not opposed to the amount, not opposed to doing it. But those things get done kind of on the spur of the moment sometimes, and I'm just bringing that to your attention. Another example of that is the Veterans Memorial. A couple of years ago, you had a budget for around $350,000 to do a Veterans Memorial. Great. All of a sudden, you know, things got a little bogged down and prices went up, and then all of a sudden in a work session, we're up to $1.5 million. Well, where'd this money come from? That's my question. Where's the money coming from that was going to not go to the school district? Where are you getting that now? And then you move budgets around and people have questions. It's not really transparent. I'm not saying that you don't need the money and that you shouldn't do it, but those things, you know, raise questions.
I'm excited.
Can I have a little bit more? I don't have much more.
Go.
And then, of course, you know about my stormwater issue, because again, this is another moving the bucket around, because the state mandated your 3.5% of property tax and all that, so you had to get money to do something with the stormwater, so over a 5-year period, you slowly boiled the frog, so that we didn't notice it, and all of a sudden we get $60 a year extra in water fees for a non-utility that the state allows you to call a utility. I'm sorry, rainfall is not a utility, and it's an inequitable tax because people who live in small houses are paying the same as people who live in acre lots. It's just not right that it should be that way. It should be a property tax infrastructure issue. And finally, on a humorous note, just to lighten the mood a little bit, the mayor made a comment at the last budget meeting about considering raising the prices for non-residents of Coppell for Rolling Oak Cemetery buying plots, right? Well, I just want to point out to everybody, so you're fully aware of it, that nobody living in Coppell has ever been buried in that cemetery.
Choice of words, choice of words.
They're living or not buried.
Jeff, you want to follow that?
Thank goodness. Strong.
Well, I do have a question that's gonna need some, city staff, answer before I get started, but am I to take it from
Jeff,
the
name and
discussion?
address, please.
Sir?
Name and address.
Jeff Barnell, 1601 East Sandy Lake Road. Am I to take it from this discussion that the city is self-funded on all of our property insurance?
Well, we can't respond to a question directly, but you can certainly pose your question and someone will get back to you.
Why do we not have a claim for the roof for the insurance on the library? If it's $1.2 million, that's. Bijou, great point. I've never come to a citizen and talked that wanted to raise the city budget and grow. I appreciate the fact that we are the fifth most desirable, but you are going to have a tough answer when people come to you and say property values have gone up and maintaining that tax rate. I can tell you that I've never spoken to a business or a residential resident here in Coppell that has asked for more coke than police officers. So that would be one thing I could suggest to you, that you didn't need to grow the budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate both of your comments and time tonight. Council, just as a reminder, we do have a council meeting tomorrow night. The previously scheduled portrait is not going to be taken because we will be missing one person. I guess we should go ahead and do it if that person was okay.
That's me. Well, it's potentially me.
Oh, no, it's
Me.
actually him.
So it's not even you.
I didn't know.
I know when you said that, I was like,
There was no
I
photo
heard this
scheduled.
done.
Well, if everybody had been here, it would have happened. So, anyway, we will take care of that later.
Enjoy that shade he just threw on me there.
I didn't.
Jim's like, I might be done
Well,
too.
yeah, I'm picking a jury in the morning, so I may or may not be late.
Well, it would be early anyway, so you probably wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
All right, so, anyway, just no photos tomorrow night. So, there being no further business before this group, we are adjourned at 8:37.
All right.